Okay, before this podcast begins properly, I need to tell you about an error I made. In this podcast, I claimed that a lot of enemies appear in only one place, when those enemies in fact appear in at least two, and in the case of bomb-bombs, multiple places. So I have an addenda at the end of this podcast that addresses those mistakes. If there are other mistakes in this, actually I know there are other mistakes in this, there's one about the bouncy box, but the other mistakes I think are more minor, but the enemy mistake I thought was bad enough that I actually did another session recording with Layman, and then I tried to edit it in, it didn't work so well, so we're gonna do it as an addenda instead. Thanks. Enjoy the podcast. So, Layman, welcome to the I Love Game Design podcast. I'm Charlie Burke. I am welcoming Charlie Layman, an old-time childhood friend and rival. Another Charlie. There can only be one.
You know, I was wondering how we were going to do this.
Yeah, well, obviously.
And I'm glad you picked the right answer.
But the question is, which answer will the viewers pick? Which Charlie will they side with in the end?
Oh, so the better one. Me, obviously.
No. I think I'm not making friends today, though, because we're talking about Super Mario 64, and although I love this game, kind of the point of this podcast for me is breaking down and trying to look at design decisions that were made that I think are a bit weirder and discussing those. But I'm interested in talking about Super Mario 64. Of course, it's the birth of the collectathon genre, which is like my favorite genre. It's a great and classic game that we both love. And I think what makes me more nervous about this one than Pokemon Gold, though, Pokemon Gold and Silver are a bit more divisive. Super Mario 64 is universally beloved, and I don't even think I've seen some real... I don't think I've really seen some analysis of some of its weirder parts. Because when I was playing it, there were parts where I actually had to think, like, wait, that's different from how they do it today. And I don't think I've seen that stuff analyzed. Anyway, Layman, what are your general thoughts?
My general thoughts are, I think Super Mario 64 is definitely like one of the games that I would point to as like a genre definer. I always like try to think of games in terms of like what they're trying to do within their genre. And I think that a lot of games that kind of start the genre essentially get like, not necessarily a free pass, but like, you know, they set the bar. That's where they start, you know? And I think that Super Mario 64, like you said, is absolutely an example of that. And having the ability to like, you know, really do a lot of new things gave it this like incredible advantage. And I don't think it's like, you know, derogatory towards Super Mario 64 to say that other games have like iterated on that and done things with the genre that Super Mario 64 wasn't able to, either due to like technological limitations or just, you know, new ideas coming out. But yeah, I think that Super Mario 64 definitely has a lot to it, and I'm excited to talk about, you know, what critiques you have of the game.
So what I'm hearing is that Layman hates Super Mario 64. And if you have any hate of anything we say, remember it was Layman's fault, because you just heard him. Other things have iterated on it, and he doesn't think that's blasphemy, which means he hates what Mario 64 did. But moving on from Layman's terrible takes. So I asked you for your general thoughts. I want to start actually by talking about the movement, because the movement is one of the things this game's really praised for. So what's your experience with the movement in this game?
Yeah, I will say that, again, this is blasphemy. Super Mario 64 is probably not my favorite movement in the 3D platformer world at this point. But again, we're looking at it however many decades later. I should have looked at the exact amount of time.
1996. Right?
Yeah, I will let you do the math on that one, dear viewer. But yeah, I don't think that's like a crazy thing to say that, you know, again, there's been iteration since Super Mario 64, but for being what is essentially like, again, this genre definer, I think that Super Mario 64's movement was like absolutely incredible. And I think that, like, you know, there's a lot of little touches in that game that really are like incredibly creative for the time and just result in a much better like game feel. I'm not going to be another person in the like video essay talking about how there's a shadow underneath Mario at all times, because other people have talked about that better, but yeah, no, there's a lot to praise there.
I was watching a video on Mario 64's movement, and I love, someone was talking about the triple jump. And the person said, some people will tell you the triple jump is great for reaching heights, but anyone who's played this knows that's not what the triple jump is for. The triple jump is for moving from place to place going, whee! And like,
And they're correct.
yeah, the triple jump is impossible to line up and time correctly. So it is just for jumping from place to place going wee. And like, they make sure you know how to triple jump because you need to do a triple jump to get the wing cap to work. But the rest of the time, it's just not worth it to try to... And it's just fun. And that kind of touch, that kind of detail is really incredible. And then there's so much they expanded in the jump. Like, the backflip exists to this day. This is the first time Mario can ground pound, right? Yoshi can ground pound in Super Mario World 2. But I don't think Mario can ground pound until Mario 64.
Unless we're talking about weird, like, cape dives in Mario World? Yeah, no.
Yeah, they did so much to that jump to give it more personality. And that side flip, too. That side flip is great. And it's the video I was watching that was saying, like, triple jumps are for going wee, was also talking about they think the long jump, the word they used is sexy. I gotta link this video in the description. I really enjoyed it. But they were talking about in future games, it doesn't feel as sexy to them. And I think it's because the long jump's a lot faster in Super Mario 64. Like, future games, your movement speed is more controlled. In this, they just let you go. And that's really cool. But I agree, Mario 64's movement isn't my favorite. And I think I'd point... I mean, wall kicks are obviously weird.
Well, they will work, though.
They work, but they're much more precise in terms of the timing. And I had a lot of trouble on the stars where it asked me to wall kick. I would mess it up like 3 times. And thankfully... Like, they never really require you to get the wall kick down very well, because I think they know most players won't.
So it's very interesting that you bring up speed, especially around long jumps, because just a lore reveal about myself. I would call a former speedrunner, and I have done exactly one speedrun of Super Mario 64, which I forgot about until literally minutes before starting this recording.
Wow.
It was a 120-star run. It took me around 6 hours. That is, if you're curious, not a good time. But it's very interesting, like all of the like speed tech that exists in this game. And I think I mentioned this to you when we were initially discussing like some of the ideas for the topic today. And I think that this ties really well into the like depth that exists around like the different types of jumping in Super Mario 64. There is a ROM hack that recently came out for Super Mario 64 called, I think it's pronounced Bazar, B-A-Z-R, this is an incredibly weird thing to say about Super Mario 64, but it is a roguelike deck builder where every action that Mario has, be it a single jump, a triple jump, a backflip, side flip, all of those are basically turned into cards that you can buy from a shop or collect throughout the game. And you only have 4 cards available to you at any given time. So you have to kind of like actually plan out your movement. And I think it's just very impressive that like the sort of dimensions within something as simple as jumping can get kind of expanded into something like that. And I don't really have anywhere that I'm going with this statement other than it's cool. And I appreciate it.
I think the jump, it's impressive how well they got the jump right on their first go. Now, that said, there are moves in Mario 64 that really don't come back. So, for example, the punch kick just disappeared. And I find it such an interesting addition because Mario obviously can't punch or kick in the games leading up to this. And this is the other thing I want to build as a theme in this episode. I'm hoping that we can discuss where Mario 64 is in the pantheon of Mario games in 1996. Because post 1996, Mario 64 starts the next series. But in 1996, Mario 64 is coming after Super Mario World. And it's introducing all these different jumps, and that's really cool. And then it gives Mario a punch and a kick. And that's weird. Never comes back. It is like almost a fluke, a blip in the timeline. And yet, I have this theory about it, and I want to share.
I'm all ears.
When I was playing, I was watching his punch, and the way he moves his arm forward, I think it's a grab. Because in Super Mario World and in Super Mario Bros. 3, they introduced this grab, where you can pick things up by holding the run button.
Right.
Mario 64 doesn't have a run button, but this punch button is what you use to pick up boxes. Maybe that's why bomb-bombs are in the first area, because you can't pick up Goombas, but you can pick up bomb-bombs. Maybe it's just to have something to pick up. And maybe that's why the bouncy boxes are there, is just to continue the grab from previous games. Bouncy boxes, by the way, weird thing. Like, just every level has a mini game where you can pick up a little box. It will bounce you 3 times and then explode into a series of coins. And it's like a little micro game that exists in Bomb Battlefield, in the desert area, and then I'm sure other places. And you see this little bouncing box, and it really is just like a little micro game inside the level for coins.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like I think the Mario series has had like a lot of those little mini games. Like I'm immediately going back to Super Mario World, where there were those like pipes that you could go into where it was just a guess. You know, there'd be 3 blocks on each tier of this little tower-like thing almost, and you know you just pick one and you'd either get a 1-up or you wouldn't. And I think it's interesting, but the grab is an interesting idea because I think you're right. And this, you've kind of immediately brought this idea into my head of things that are put into games as mechanics out of necessity to overcome like almost technological limitations or to keep them more in line with like past iterations in the series. And this is such a bizarre like parallel to draw, but stay with me because what you immediately made me think of was Fallout 3. I don't think you've ever played a lot of Fallout 3 at least. But one of the things in that game is the VATS system, VATS, which basically it's the system where you hit a button, time freezes, and you basically get this zoom in on an enemy, and you get to target like specific parts, you know, their legs, their torso, their head, you know. And what, again, this is, I'm aping off of a lot of video essays here, but one thing that a lot of people bring up is how this is basically meant to compensate for the fact that that game's like real-time shooting is actually not great and kind of hard to wrangle just because of the way that, you know, accuracy in that game works. There's a whole mathematical calculation behind it. And what I kind of end up thinking is like, I'm wondering if the punch and kick system was kind of put in there as a way to help players navigate 3D space. Because again, like imagine like you've never touched anything that involves 3D controls in the past and the game asks you to jump on a Goomba. Now in 2D, that's, you know, fairly straightforward, even though I'm sure the first Goomba in Super Mario Brothers 1 probably has one of the highest kill counts of any video game enemy ever to exist. But like, you know, again, you're adding that extra dimension to it, and I think that like giving players like more options to just like, okay, let's make this a little simpler is an interesting concept. Now, I have no idea if that is even remotely accurate. This is just complete spitballing, but I think that that's an interesting idea.
I think absolutely. No, so to me, when I look at it, the motion looks like a grab, and so I wonder if it came out of the necessity to make a grab into something useful.
Right.
But I think the reason it would stick around is that. And certainly in Banjo-Kazooie, when I was fighting enemies in that, well, I guess in Banjo-Kazooie you can't jump on enemies, so maybe that's why. But like,
well, you can. It just doesn't go well for you.
It certainly is, though. Especially when I was trying to get my feet back on it, nice to have that other option of being able to punch enemies or dive into enemies to kill them. The B button for that was a really nice alternative to jumping when jumping can be quite difficult. The other thing, I mean, that gets into Goombas, which I want to talk about, but there is like one last thing on this that I wanted to bring up, which is sliding. Because, so I want to explain, I was doing Bomb on Battlefield, I think, and I missed the red coin that you have to like slide down. Do you remember you're going up the mountain part way and then you have to slide down and get that red coin?
Yes, the one that's on the slope.
And I was doing this jump kick to kind of push myself backward up the mountain. And I was like, oh, it's really neat that they included this jump kick that you can kind of control yourself while sliding. And then I thought, wait, why am I sliding? Like, why is this slope such that you need to slide? And it's like, there's a slope in Bomb on Battlefield that makes sense, and that's the white slope, which, by the way, I have nothing else to add to this, but stroke of genius that they made it white, that captured my imagination so much as a kid. I was like, there's snow on this one part of the level. And it's like, if they'd made it green, it just wouldn't be nearly as notable as a slope.
Yeah.
But that white slope, I get why it's a slope that you have to slide down. But every other slope in Bomb on Battlefield, why can't Mario walk up it? Like, is that red coin on that slope maybe just to teach you slide mechanics? But there's so much more sliding in Mario 64 than in subsequent Mario games. And part of me wants to be like, Well, sliding was this huge part of Mario 3, where if you crouched and slide, you picked up a bunch of speed. And that would explain the slide minigames, like Peach's Secret Slide, or this race against the penguin, or the like race on the mountain peak in the secret wall. That would explain those. Like, great, you needed to bring in sliding in some way. But like everywhere else, it's really quite annoying. Like, I guess it adds a challenge to climbing the pyramid to get that star, that you need either a Koopa shell or good platforming skills. But I didn't like that. I didn't like that one. I didn't like trying to climb that pyramid. It comes up in the invisibility cap has the opening section where you have to wrangle with the camera to try to get the red coins as you slide down.
Oh,
and it
yes.
is this funny. There's a piece of me that's like, they knew that sliding wasn't going to be as fun, so they made sure you knew it wasn't fun, so that you weren't like, why can't I slide in my Mario game? Like, there's a piece of me that has this conspiracy theory, and I know it's ludicrous, that it's like, by making sliding not fun, we're no longer complaining that we can't slide, like in Mario 3.
I think a lot of this does come down to level design and, like, you know, the question of, well, if you can just climb the pyramid, is there a challenge there? Which I think that, yeah, that specific first slope that you get to does really teach you about, like, you know, yeah, there are going to be things in this game that you can't climb up. And just that knowledge is, like, obviously important for the rest of the game. And yeah, I don't know. The thoughts about, like, you know, subsequent games, including slides, I'm trying to think forward in time here. And I feel like most of the slides that we get throughout the rest of the series are callbacks to Mario 64. Like, I can think of, like, Galaxy and Galaxy 2 having slide stages where they explicitly play the slider theme that you get in Mario 64. So, like, yeah, it's interesting.
But you're never in those games, even though you have slide levels, which are fine. I like the slide levels even in Mario 64. You don't have, like, a moment where you're walking, you think you're fine, you hit a slope wrong, or the slope gets too steep, and now you're sliding. And you're like, what? Why? No, don't. Like, going for that red coin in Bomb Battlefield, yeah, I guess it's teaching you a lesson. Beware our geometry. But I'm like, that's not fun. And that's why I don't think in subsequent Mario games there's any of that. Even in Banjo-Kazooie, I don't think there are any moments where you slide when you're not expecting to.
Once you get the Talon Trot, there aren't.
Fair.
However,
yes.
In that first level, there's some geometry that I will describe as very reminiscent of the Invisible Cap stage.
I grant you that, but you get the Talon Trot in that level.
Yes, that's fair.
So it does not last long. But yeah, I forgot that you used the Talon Trot to do that.
And now I'm trying to think of, like, what would happen in Mario 64 if they gave you a mechanic to, like, climb slopes. The what if that I'm sure a ROM hack has covered at some point.
But then you had mentioned jumping on Goombas is harder in 3D space. And I find this one of the other fascinating things is you have to reimagine enemy movement for the 3D space. And so Goombas are really interesting because they just make them chase you. Koopas are interesting because they make them run away from you. But then they make the Koopa shell do a totally different thing. Because in other 3D Mario games, because it was 2D, you could launch the Koopa shell at enemies and kill a bunch of enemies. And I think they eventually get back to that in, like, Super Mario 3D Land. They figure out how to make that work again.
Yeah.
But in Super Mario 64, it's like, it's hard to aim a Koopa shell in 3D space, so they make the Koopa shell into a different kind of useful power-up that you go surfing on, which is a really interesting innovation, too. I find these changes really interesting. These places where it's like, here's a thing from the Mario universe that we need to adapt. And I think the Goomba and Koopa adaptations are really smart. And then the Bomb adaptation is really smart too, giving you something to grab onto very early on. Though fascinating because it makes Bomb-Ombs kind of way more important than they had been to that point. Bomb-Ombs are an enemy introduced in the American version of Super Mario Bros. 2, the reskin of Doki Doki Panic. And I know they appear in Super Mario World because you need them to fight the final Bowser. But I think other than that, they're just not that common. And then here they are right in the first level. And then the pink Bomb-Ombs become your friend.
Well, first off, allow me to push up my non-existent glasses and assert my dominance as the better Charlie by saying, actually, those were Mecha Koopas in Super Mario World. But
Oh
you are
my
correct
God,
in
they
that.
were.
But you are correct in that.
Why'd I think they were?
They were. There were bomb-ombs in Mario World. They just were not in the final boss. Anyways, I think the comparison of like adaptation of like 2D game mechanics to 3D is like very interesting because I know we're both. This is again a crazy thing to reveal here, but we're both Sonic fans. And I think that the like adaptation of like Sonic's 2D level design to 3D level design is much more one-to-one than Mario 64 was. And I think that this is almost a weird thing to say. I think it benefited Sonic more than it benefited Mario. Now, again, I'm sure that people are rushing to the comments section for that statement.
Explain real quick. Wait, so the transition to 3D benefited Sonic or staying one-to-one benefited Sonic?
Staying one-to-one through the transition. And I say this because I think that playing a 2D, like getting what is essentially a 2D Sonic game translated into 3D, and I'm going with like, you know, the action stages of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 specifically here, did those games a lot of good. Now, this is not to disparage the 2D games. I think they are fantastic. Sonic, I know we have our disagreements about which of the 2D, like original 2D Sonic games is the best one, but I think that they do a fantastic job in terms of like the level design, just like, you know, making sure that like, you know, you're able to, you know, run through these stages and find all the little goodies and you know, have a good time. But what I find really interesting is that in terms of the stated goal of going fast, I found myself much better able to do that in Sonic Adventure 2 than I did in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 or 3, where a lot of that came down to I can see the enemies that are ahead of me. And that's, again, comments. I'm not disparaging the 2D Sonic games. I think that, like, you know, the speed that you are given in those games is appropriate to what the game wants you to be doing and how fast the game thinks that you'll be going compared to like enemy placement and all that is excellent. It's just an interesting thing to see that sort of one-to-one translation kind of give you more and put you in a place where you can complete the stated goal in a way that like doesn't, you know, result in you going, well, I tried to do the thing that the game told me to do, go fast, and I just slammed my face into an enemy.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
So I want to restate what I think you were saying. I think what you're trying to say is Sonic, the original 2D Sonic formula, had things that, if it were 3D, would be an asset to that formula. Whereas the original 2D Super Mario World formula didn't have those same benefits coming. In fact, it has a lot of disadvantages because the aiming of trying to jump on things becomes harder.
Yeah.
And so it made more sense for Mario to reinvent itself.
I think that that's a good summary because I think that, Sonic was the one-to-one translation was much more useful for Sonic, and I think that like the necessity of kind of reinvention for Super Mario 64 also really benefited it as well.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the short version of what I was saying.
And Mario eventually gets things that kind of bring the traditional formula into 3D in Super Mario 3D Land and Super Mario 3D World, which...
Yeah, absolutely.
Love both those games. They are not my jam the way Mario 64 and its ilk are my jam. Well... I really liked 3D Land, but but yeah, it does eventually get the more one-to-one treatment. But it takes a while before Mario feels confident translating those 2D ideas of a more linear level into a 3D space. Now, something I actually do appreciate. I said Bomb-Bomb became a really common enemy, and actually when I think about it, that's not true, because Bomb-Bomb exists in Bomb-Bomb Battlefield, and the pink Bomb-Bomb exists everywhere. But I actually don't think you encounter the Bomb-Bomb outside of Bomb-Bomb Battlefield. And then, as I think about other enemies, you don't really encounter the bullies outside of Lethal Lava Land, aside from the giant Freezy bully. You don't really encounter the sunflower spinny guys that make you go woo and spin in the air.
Fly Guys, thank you very much.
Not Shy Guys. No. I'm talking about the little. They're in the snowman level.
Oh wait, you're thinking of I believe they're called spindrifts.
Spindrifts. You don't see spindrifts outside of that level. Are they original to Mario 64, or do they appear in like Yoshi's Island or something?
That's an excellent question. They are original to Super Mario 64.
Weird enemy to invent, may I say. Though Bully's also a weird enemy to invent, but at least Bullies are so simple. I'm like, oh, they were going for simple geometry.
Exactly.
But like a lot of the enemies, Monty Moles, I think, only appear on that mountainside. Piranha plants appear more than once, but Thwomps are pretty much exclusive to Thwomp's Fortress. Like, it's amazing.
Womp. You're gonna get some comments about that.
Oh, because Thwomps are different.
Those are the square ones.
And Womps are... But Thwomps also appear in Womp's Fortress.
You've actually'd my actuallying.
Yeah.
How dare you?
So... I used the plural. I should have used the singular, so fine. We're both right. We're right twice. But I do love that. Like, one of the things that made Mario Bros. 3 really magical to play through is that each level felt unique. And one of the ways it accomplished that is through kind of unique level enemies, or enemies that felt unique to that level. So even if it repeats enemies, you know, you don't see enemies too often. And so seeing them continue that trend feels really good, where part of what makes Womp's Fortress is the Womps and Thwomps. And part of what makes Bob-omb Battlefield are the Bob-ombs. And also that place where they rain down bubbles on you, because I don't know why it's bubbles that they're firing out of the cannon, but whatever.
I just saw somebody in a YouTube video raise this exact question. I think the comment that somebody left was that, well, what's a good way to stop the lethality of a bomb other than a water bubble?
Oh, yeah, because it's the whole point is that King Bob-omb is raining terror on Bob-omb's battlefield.
I have no idea if that was the intended purpose of those bubbles, but that's what some random YouTube comment said, and I thought it made sense, so hey.
Yeah, I like it. That is also, though, I wanted to bring up as one of the weird things is some of these levels have a bit of a story to them. And isn't that interesting? And Bob-omb's Battlefield maybe is the most prominent one, where it actually kind of explains why the pink Bob-ombs now want to give you help, is because you killed the evil Bob-omb tyrant king who was oppressing them somehow. A little unclear. Or maybe it is clear. I didn't read the text this time. This time when I played, I just pressed A through all the text. But there's a lot of text in Mario 64, and that's something else I forgot. And these stories are, like, it's something that's missing from the later games, and that is a little sad. Not all the later games, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll be honest, I don't miss it in Bowser's Fury. Bowser's Fury, I think, is great for its simplicity. I wouldn't want stories on those little islands. I think that would bog it down too much. And these stories maybe go on a little long for my liking. You could just give me like 2 lines, save me from the Bob-omb King. But it's something Mario Sunshine expands on, but I don't feel like Mario Galaxy does, in my memory.
Oh, you're gonna get some comments for that comment.
Mario Galaxy has a story about Rosalina, but do the individual galaxies have stories?
No, I think that's fair, yeah. To my recollection, I think the most like intense story in Galaxy is probably like Honey Hive Galaxy, where there's just like the queen is itchy or something along those lines. But yeah, I do really appreciate individual level storylines, and this is something that we may have preemptively discussed this game a little bit, but I think A Hat in Time does incredibly well. And most of those stories are definitely, like, you know, goofier, and I guess this is actually a question for you. I know you've touched A Hat in Time. How far into that game did you get exactly? I'm not sure if you played any of the DLCs or anything.
I beat the main story and I tried the DLCs. And you brought up Hat in Time to talk about the levels do a great job in that of telling stories.
Absolutely.
So Mafia Town with the Mafia boss, the film where you're picking sides in the films, which is so fun. The Halloween where that you sign the contract to sign away your soul, or
yes.
something.
Oh yeah, and that one in particular I think is really interesting because I don't know if you ever experienced this, but there's some hidden lore you can find in that stage about I don't know if you recall the stage where you're kind of almost on a stealth mission through the manor as like the queen is like hunting you down.
Yes, which is fun. That's almost like a mini horror game in the whole thing.
Yes,
that's yes.
You say mini, although I do know that the devs kept a developer shortcut from the basement of the manor directly to the timepiece, just in case people were a little too freaked out by that stage, which is great. But there's also, if memory serves, some like hidden lore that you can find regarding like the queen, Vanessa, I think her name is, and the Snatcher, the little ghost guy that you sign the contracts with, which is it's very interesting, and it's just a nice little touch on the level. And I think that like this kind of gets back into the like it's the little touches, you know, in a lot of these stages that really just you know, help make that difference.
And this is actually was also going to be one of my complaints about Mario 64. Don't get in the comments. Ignore this part. If you love Mario 64, skip ahead like 2 minutes. But I actually think some of the stages have this, right? Like the Bomb on Battlefield want you to take down the king and then befriend you. And like these places, Womp's Fortress and Bomb on Battlefield, I feel like have a placeness. There's a theme there that works pretty well. Womp's Fortress, I was gonna list as a place that felt more geometry based and more challenge based than like place based. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, you're fighting giant stone people. Of course, they have a giant stone fortress that looks just like a 3D challenge. But when I think about certain spaces, and Lethal Lava Land comes to mind for this. Lethal Lava Land, when you enter the volcano, great placeness. But outside the volcano, it really just feels like a collection of platforming challenges.
I'd agree with that.
And that's fine, and that's fun, but like a number of Mario 64 levels like have this sense of space and even the story. Boo's Mansion has kind of maybe one of the more story-based ones because you fight Boo like 3 times.
And that ties directly into Luigi's Mansion, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, well, I actually was gonna say the funny thing about the Boo's Mansion. Well, let's ignore that for a second. Let's come back. But there are these other ones though that lack placeness, and Lethal Lava Land maybe being the worst offender. But Wet Dry World, to an extent too, just feels like a series of like geometric shapes.
And with that, dear YouTube comments, I ask that you not go after my friend Charlie, for I know that there is a great deal of lore around the skybox of Wet Dry World. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not familiar with the skybox of Wet Dry World.
I'm trying to remember the exact details off the top of my head, but I believe there was like a fairly like intense search to find like the photos that the skybox is based off of. And
really,
yeah, and I think people did eventually find it, and if memory serves, it's unsurprisingly a like city in Greece. But again, I'm the master of like having vague recollections of various things that I've seen on the internet, and I know that that's one of them. But I know that there is like a very specific subset of people who have very intense feelings about Wet Dry World because of that.
Interesting. Well, it looks a little plain to me. And I would not have picked up on it until I was making this video. It was so weird to try to prepare for this video because Mario 64 is so iconic that I forget that it's made design decisions. So like when I realized I was sliding down slopes more often than I needed to be, I was like, wait, what? Like I never. And then when I realized that Lethal Lava Land is kind of boring until you enter, because also entering the volcano is so cool that like I think I just forgot that the rest of it is kind of like just lava. Like, the rest of it is kind of nothing special. Because you enter the volcano, like, I think one of my most memorable moments is entering that pyramid. And like, I don't know if I'd say the desert lacks placeness. It kind of does. It kind of is just desert. Like, I don't really know what that concrete hut is supposed to be doing. Why does it look like it's out of stone? I guess it's shade, but it doesn't look very themed to the desert. And I don't really know what that maze is doing there, but it's surrounded by quicksand, so I forgive it. But Lethal Lava Land, I don't know. I'm just rambling now. But there are places that lack placeness, I guess.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that, yeah, Lethal Lava Land is probably like the most intense of those. It is very much like it feels almost like a Tony Hawk, not a Tony Hawk level, like a generic skateboarding game level, because you get that Koopa shell out of the box, and it's incredibly fun to, slide around on top of the lava with that. But, it does definitely feel like it has, like, kind of that intense, like, function over form kind of design to it.
Yeah.
Which is, it definitely lacks something in comparison to some of the other stages. And I do also have to issue an apology. Moments ago, I credited the Wet Dry World skybox as being Greece. It is Yemen. Apologies. I'm sorry.
Obviously, I'm cutting this out of the video.
No!
Obviously, I'm just going to have you say Greece again. Chop it together. It's indeed Greece, is what he said. Okay. But actually, Hat in Time, fascinating game.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it's a fascinating game because I actually view it as a tour through the Mario 3D games.
I can see that, yeah.
The first world is very Mario Sunshine coded.
Mm-hmm. No argument there.
Right? Like, Mario Sunshine, for those who don't know, has worlds that you can explore that feel like Mario 64, but Mario Sunshine really takes better advantage of the fact that you get kicked out of levels, which is actually a whole thing we can discuss. Is that decision right there. Mario 64 doesn't take very good advantage of that. It doesn't remake the levels in huge ways, but Mario Sunshine really does. And Hat in Time really does in that first level. The second level, to me, feels very Galaxy coded. Because Galaxy, for my taste, Galaxy takes the remaking of levels too far. Where, like, you can hardly even recognize you're in the same space sometimes.
Remind me which level you're thinking of with the second one. I might have gotten
the movies.
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah.
So I love Galaxy, but I like recognizing the spaces I'm in. And I really appreciate in Hat in Time, though, this trying out of this idea of, like, the space can change really quite radically. Like, in one you're on a train, and another you're between. Like, probably even going further than Galaxy does in this regard. And then the third level, I'd say, is kind of back to Mario Sunshine. Maybe a little more Mario 64. Its touch is a little subtler. And then the final level, and I know A Hat in Time predates Odyssey, and definitely predates Bowser's Fury. But I think the fourth level, which is like in the mountaintop and you travel to different locations, reminded me first of Odyssey as one big level that you're not kicked out of between, really. And then when Bowser's Fury came out, I was like, actually, this is way better a metaphor. Because like there are like 4 sections that you go to collect the yarn balls. Not yarn balls. What are you collecting? Timepieces.
Hourglasses,
to collect the timepieces. There are like 4 sections you're going to collect the timepieces. And it really does feel like different islands in Bowser's Fury. So what's so neat about A Hat in Time, its levels explore the genre in different ways. It's not just that the levels are exploring different mechanics. The levels are exploring actually different ways to do the 3D platformer collectathon genre.
Yeah, there's incredibly varied level design there that I really appreciate.
Yeah. The Metro, I would say, is maybe more Odyssey, and then the cruise ship is again Sunshine. So it leans towards Sunshine, which the creators have always been open about.
Very open about.
But yeah, I'm so impressed by how the levels really differentiate themselves, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that's always important for a game in a genre like this, just because, again, you're kind of doing the same general thing. Not necessarily, this is going to sound disparaging, but I don't mean it that way. Like, you are kind of doing the same thing over and over. You're running around on platforms, you're doing like different, movement techniques to get to different places, and like the geometry in a level, like the actual like physical way in which you get from point A to point B is obviously always going to be different. And I think that it's very important because there's so much like similarity in the moveset that you're doing to have like this variety in the design of the levels, even just visually. And I think, obviously Super Mario 64 does a fantastic job of this. And I think that like a lot of the best games in the genre really like have a pretty significant variety in their like level design. Like, again, going back to Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, there's a pretty wide variety in the level design visually there. There's a wide visual design across, Hat in Time. This is really kind of one of those things where, again, it's the art style versus realism kind of argument that I think a lot of people have been discussing kind of in that same vein as that conversation.
So the other thing I brought up, Big Boo's Mansion, which when we were kids was one of my brother's favorite levels, and having replayed, I completely agree. Like, it's, I think, become my favorite level. But what is weird about it to me is, in terms of Mario theming, when we talk about Mario's jump to 3D, Big Boo's Haunt is, like, better themed to what has come before. There are whole Boo House stages in Super Mario World, and this is a Boo House. But I can't help but feel like it's not different from any of the other stages in the way Boo Houses in Super Mario World are so interesting because there are several different exits. And yet, the problem is all Mario 64 levels have several different exits. And this one doesn't feel like it has any more than others. I guess we could talk about the little puzzle of hitting the books in the right order, but there are so many of those in Dire Dire Docks. There are 2 in Dire Dire Docks already, and another in the Bowser submarine level at the bottom where you open treasure chests in the right order. So the Boo House just doesn't feel like a Super Mario World Boo House. This is one of the places where it really does just feel like a skin.
No, I would agree, yeah. It's interesting because I think that the Boo Houses in Mario World feel much more... disconnected is the wrong word. They feel much less cohesive than Super Mario 64. And I think a lot of that, again, comes down to the fact that you're not really revisiting them outside of, like, finding the second, entrance. And again, this is one of those things where I think the translation between 2D and 3D really benefits the 3D version. I think Big Boo's Haunt is as something that you can see physically with your own eyes, and you can see how the layout works and how different rooms connect to each other. I think that does really lend it a sense of cohesion, and I think that that's something that is probably unique to more contained areas, because obviously there are plenty of forest stages in Super Mario World, for example, right? Or just general grassland type stages, and the same is true of Bob-omb Battlefield. That is, for all intents and purposes, a kind of grassland stage, if we're going to categorize things that way.
With one ice slope.
True, if you choose to read it as an ice slope, because my brain always registered that as smooth stone, like slate,
Interesting. Okay, yeah, but keep going.
We'll hash that out later. But yeah, I think because Big Boo's Haunt is very much it's an primarily indoor stage, having that extra sense of cohesion really does do it a lot of good. Just because, again, if we're looking at Super Mario World, when you enter a door, there's just kind of that transition that happens. There's a pixel fade, and then you wind up in a different area, and there's not that sense of where you're going and where the geometry is. And this is not to say, I think that there are games that use that sense of disconnection very intentionally and do a good job of disorienting you intentionally. But I think that this is a really interesting aspect to the 2D versus 3D translation,
And I think you're making me appreciate it more. So 2 things.
You.
So already it was my favorite Mario 64 stage, but I didn't appreciate it as a translation. But you point out that it's indoors. And so that's something I hadn't considered. And especially thinking about that, that's a really unique aspect of it. The way that you go in one door and it loops around to another entrance into the atrium is something that I hadn't appreciated, and actually does remind me of the Boo House stages in Mario World. I was saying that those stages have multiple exits, and so there's nothing unique to add to Super Mario 64. But that indoor space and that sense of, hey, this door has just brought me back to the beginning. How do I get to where I need to go? Actually is very prominent in this stage, because a lot of those doors loop back in on themselves. And then the other thing I was thinking about in terms of secret exits, I forgot that you, in 2 spaces in that level, use the invisibility cap to go into Boo paintings for 2 different stars. One for the first star to find different Boos, and the other one you recognize immediately and know it's what you have to do. You have to do a wall kick in a tight timeline to get behind a Boo painting to fight a giant eyeball. So maybe I was being too hard in saying it doesn't adapt Boo houses, because that's what I was trying to argue, is it doesn't adapt Boo houses, it's just a standard level. But actually, now that you point out it's indoors, now that I think about how it loops back in on itself, I'm changing my mind. And it's going from A rank to S rank in my head right now. That is maybe the best level. But yeah.
Miyamoto, you're welcome. I'm here to help out.
So one of the things that we've kind of touched on, but I think is maybe worth mentioning, is that Super Mario 64 boots you out of levels.
Yes.
And it's almost weird to bring up because I've already made, truthfully, 2, but right now only 1. I made a video and then remade it. And... published the better one. But I made a video on this design decision of booting you out of levels and the reasons platformers would make it. But it's really interesting because there are games that do make it, like Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Mario Galaxy, and games that don't, like Banjo-Kazooie and Mario Odyssey. And I guess games that do both, like Hat in Time, because I think the 4th level of Hat in Time doesn't boot you out. But when I was younger, I thought of this as a mistake. They were booting you out because it was their first time in the genre, and then Banjo-Kazooie fixed it by not booting you out. And then when I was replaying for, I think when it came out as Super Mario All-Stars, I replayed it. So not for this podcast, but earlier. I had this realization that, like, oh, when I was a kid and got booted out of a level, I didn't go immediately back into the first level and then, like, go get another star in the first level because the first level's easiest. I was immediately like, wait, what does this star unlock? And visited other levels first before coming back to the first level.
Interesting.
And then I started to think, and it should have been clear to me earlier because of Mario Sunshine and Mario Galaxy, the fact that games continue to do this. Oh, this is a design decision, the booting you out of levels.
Right.
So, like, it's there, I think, to get you to explore and come back.
Yeah. I don't think I would disagree with that, because I think there can be, like, multiple reasons to do something like that. Obviously, I think earlier we touched on A Hat in Time doing it because it needs to completely, like, rearrange the level, and you don't have that sort of, like, going back to the exact same, thing. And Mario 64 obviously does that a little bit here and there, like, obviously, like the tower in Mom's Fortress. And I think that it's interesting to look at how this has changed in, like, modern reimaginings of things, because specifically the idea of kicking you out of the level in Mario 64 actually gets, like, overwritten by a lot of modern, like, ROM hacks for Super Mario 64, which is always interesting to talk about, like, ROM hack game design versus, like, original game design. But I think in Super Mario 64, there's some, like, very direct comparison points here. And obviously, that has to happen sometimes, right? Like, there are, like we said, those points where the level does change, but, like, for the vast majority of the stars in various levels, the changes are either very small or, there's only, like, one star that changes, what the design of the level is. And I think that, like, looking at it from the perspective of encouraging you to try different things is also very interesting, because, again, we're looking at a game that is kind of the genre definer, and I think encouraging people to, like, take a look at what else is out there. Like, I believe, if memory serves, Peach's Secret Slide that's a 1-star door, right?
Yes.
So you kind of run into this thing where, like, the first star that you get immediately sends you to this completely different style of level where it's, sending you on this, like, almost mini game to go down the slide versus, like, climb up a tower. And I will hold only a little bit of a grudge against Peach's Secret Slide for being the 1 star that I could not find for the life of me for probably a year as a child, because I just had no idea that the time one was a thing. But that's a separate conversation.
I love those little mini levels because I think they're such an interesting pace break. I was playing Super Lucky's Quest recently, and I, like, am somewhat baffled by how addictive I found the game, while thinking it was not, above mid, but not amazing. But yet I couldn't put it down. And I think one of the reasons is Super Lucky's Tale has, every once in a while, these autorunners. And I don't even like Super Lucky's Tale autorunners. Like, I love Kaze and the Wild Masks autorunners. Super Lucky's Tale's autorunners are just fine.
I believe it's K's in the Wild Masks.
I believe it's Kazaa! And the Wild Masks.
Some Super Mario 64 humor for you.
Shall we talk about GIF first GIF? But like, sorry, I'm getting so off topic. Super Lucky's Tale. The auto runners aren't even that good, but they're just a change of pace. And so something I think I'd forgotten is like there's Peach's Secret Slide and the red coin star that's all underwater, which is such a cool secret, that little hole in the ceiling that you gotta look for. I love that. And those are two really nice just changes of pace right at the beginning. And I actually found the swimming in the one all underwater a lot easier this time. I went in like, am I gonna get that star? Because I gotta say the wing cap, 8 red coin star? No.
Yes, the death point of a lot of 120 star runs.
Yeah.
I understand.
Well, clearly not yours. 6 hours.
Clearly. Skills. Yeah.
Skills. But yeah, giving you Peach's Secret Slide that early is interesting. I actually, though, replaying, did have this sort of complaint about Mario 64, which was the main levels. I don't think all the main levels need to be 6 stars. 7 with the 100 coins.
Interesting.
Because, well, I mean, take, for example, the Tall Mountain, I think it is, where the first star, you climb to the top of the mountain, and the second star, you climb to the top of the mountain, and then try to catch an annoying monkey. Take Womp's Fortress, where the first star, you climb to the top of the level and fight a giant Womp, and the second star, you climb to the top of a level and then climb a little higher. Take Bomb Battlefield, where the first star, you climb to the top of the mountain and fight a Bomb, and the second star, you climb to the top of the level just fast this time. Like, there are a lot of, like, places where... Oh, the Wiggler! To get to the Wiggler, the Wiggler's just like a further point along the climb to the top of the mountain star. Like, you just have to drain the water first. There's so many stars.
I think I would maybe say that the draining the water adds a little bit of a puzzle element to it, which I do like. But
yes.
I think I do absolutely agree with you on the rest of these. Yeah.
I'm saying keep the Wiggler, for the record. Keep the Wiggler, get rid of the climb to top star. The Wiggler's great, because again, one of the lenses I want to view this from is how does this adapt Mario games? And the Wiggler is a way to include another Mario enemy. And I'm sorry, Thwomp King, who you have to stomp on 3 times, but the tower is the only place a Bullet Bill appears in here. So if I can only pick one, I pick the tower.
Oh, you fool.
I know.
You're gonna get comments.
I know. It's fine.
You've forgotten the Tiny Huge Island Bullet Bill.
What? I did. Wait, where?
Isn't it in the section where there's the, in the Huge Island where there's the wind? Am I completely misremembering this? Hold on.
You might be right.
Oh, I think I was mixing up Mario 64 and Mario 64 DS.
Oh.
Because, okay, Bullet Bills were also added in Dire Docks at the submarine dock. Okay. Well, this time the comments are going to come after me.
But the climbing, one thing is, I think you could get rid of some of these stars. Some of them in some levels feel repetitive. And Big Boo's Hunt could take another star because, you know, I just love that place.
Yeah. One where you have to play the piano. Just traumatize the children further.
Oh, the piano that eats you mean?
The monster piano, yeah.
Right, perfect. The other thing I think is so many of these are climb to the top levels, which maybe has to do with how they were trying to imagine these kinds of spaces, right? You can't really, they're trying to keep some of these stars more linear, right? But in order to make the spaces still explorable, you can't have the level be super long, right? Or wide. So the levels instead have to be vertical, but it results in a lot of climb to the top levels. Tick-Tock Clock, Bomb Battlefield, Womp's Fortress, Tall Mountain, Big Small World. All of these are climb to the top stars. And even Big Boo's Haunt has a climb to the top star, but I totally forgive it because I love that level. And it's not on a mountain. It feels totally different. Climbing indoors feels different. Yes. You have to use a wall kick, and I don't know, it does feel different.
It does. I would agree.
So that's something I do wish they'd been able to do a little less of, I think.
I think I would agree with that. I am a big proponent of vertical level design. I apologize for nothing. Dark Souls has forever altered my brain chemistry. I do like games that are able to kind of have that sort of verticality to them and loop back on themselves in an interesting way. Mario 64 is interesting in that way because I think it does lay the groundwork for a lot of that. Because if you actually look at like the stages in Mario 64, a lot of them really are just kind of these squares floating in space, essentially.
Yeah.
And there's that, like, yeah, like you said, level of verticality where they're just kind of built on top of each other, or built on top of themselves, rather.
Yeah.
I think Hazy Maze Cave is probably the most interesting in terms of that conversation, because I think that that one kind of goes both upwards and downwards, whereas a lot of stages just go upwards.
Hazy Maze Cave would not have fallen into this complaint for me, because Hazy Maze Cave doesn't feel... even the climbing sections don't feel like climbing in the same way. That's really interesting. I love that level. That's another one that just really clicks
And
with me.
I'll let you in on a secret here.
What?
Hazy Maze Cave is also an indoor level. It's just in a cave rather than a house.
That's a fair point. I think you found the secret. Those are the levels.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Those and Bob-omb Battlefield. Well, oh my god. I was telling you I love going in the pyramid and in the volcano.
Yes. Oh my god.
I'm just an indoor guy. That's all. That's all that's happening here. That's what we're discovering.
You're a... Wow. We've cracked the code, I think.
There it is. But yeah, that goes up and down. That's a really interesting point. I also think part of what makes me anxious about vertical level design is what happens on Tall Tall Mountain. Is that the falling. There's something annoying about falling not to your death, but to an earlier part of the level.
Oh, yes.
So this is something that in Tall Tall Mountain can happen very easily and several times, and you can always replenish all your health by simply ducking underwater and coming back up. Another weird feature of this being the first in its genre. But, like, that really bugs me. I'd almost rather just fall to my death and start over. When I fall not to my death, it somehow feels more like backtracking, even if I don't lose all my progress.
So it's very interesting that you bring this up, because I'm going to go back to something that I brought up earlier with that Bizarre ROM hack.
Yeah.
Where one of the interesting changes that it made is that falling off of a stage does not kill you. It puts you back on the last like solid ground that you were touching, and
Love that.
basically just removes some of your cards as a punishment.
Love that.
Which has resulted in a lot of the people that I have seen play that ROM hack kind of end up in this position where they're starting to fall off of TikTok clock or something from very high up. And again, because your move pool is so limited by the like limited cards that you have in that game, it actually makes it's much more relieving to fall off the stage completely and get put back up to where you were than to hit the very bottom of the stage where you're just stuck. And I absolutely agree, because I think that that is basically an extension of the feeling that you get playing the vanilla game, because I absolutely agree. I think that like having that sort of, oh, okay, I screwed up badly and the game has punished me by just knocking off a life and putting me back in Peach's castle feels more fair than the game just saying, all right, you're back at the bottom, start over. Even though it's honestly just doing that and more.
Yeah.
There's that, like, you don't have that feeling.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting.
Yeah. But I was going to say, I love games that don't kill you when you fall off the level, but just remove some health. I think that's a great way to make that work. But then you do need to fall off the level in those vertical sections and not fall onto an earlier, or else you end up backtracking. But yeah,
yes,
it is weird that dying, which involves backtracking, feels better than not dying. There are a few more things I have just about ways Mario 64 is adapting classic Mario, and then a few things I have about weird things Mario 64 is doing. So something I really wanted to praise, I love the caps.
Yes.
Having now like gone back to Mario World, I think the caps are such a good extension of the way those switches work in Mario World, the switches that create those exclamation mark boxes. Because in Mario World, you step on one of these switches and it creates extra boxes in certain levels. So you step on a yellow switch and now yellow boxes appear in certain levels. You step on the red switch and red boxes appear in certain levels. And those boxes help you get to other stuff or might contain power-ups. But this idea that the boxes are themselves power-ups that help you get to... So in Mario 64, you hit the red switch, and rather than red boxes appearing that you can stand on, red boxes appear that give you the wing cap.
Exactly.
It's such a good extension because it does the same thing too. The wing cap helps you get to other areas and it helps you find secrets and courses that you couldn't find without it. So yeah, I love that. Just 10 out of 10.
No argument. I don't know that I have much to add to that because, yeah, I think that is just like a good natural evolution of things, and it really just does, yeah, add to the level design.
And then in terms of weird things that I just noticed in a lot of different levels, the bouncing boxes I already brought up as a kind of micro game that I'm like, these appear kind of often. And I was gonna say, I don't really know why, but actually they're just kind of silly fun. The blue coin switches do the same thing, of just like a little timed challenge for a few extra coins when you're going for the 100 coin star. The other one, though, that appears in pretty much every level, and really doesn't need to, are cannons.
Yes.
And it's that theming around the pink bomb-oms. You find the pink bomb-omb in every level to help you unlock a cannon. And when I was replaying, I never made it to the top of the snowman. That star just didn't interest me. And then I found the pink bomb-omb inside the igloo. And that's like the last star you get is the igloo star, I think. And so the pink bomb-omb unlocked the cannon for me. And then I just shot to the top and got that first star. But I'm like, I don't think that cannon does anything except help you sequence break in that way. I think that cannon in that level is only useful for skipping the climbing of the snowman.
That's really interesting. I've never actually thought about like the order of operations there. Because yeah, it is definitely, like, I know getting to the top of the snowman is the first of the stars,
and it's annoying.
So yeah, that cannon is really like just for fun or sequence breaking.
Yeah,
depending on what order you decide to go for the stars in.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But here's the other thing: is the cannons are hard to aim, and yet they kind of become a cornerstone of the game. Like, you don't go where the cannon cursor is, you go slightly below the cursor. And yet there's a star in Wobb's Fortress where basically you're just aiming at this flagpole. And I had to aim like 5 times because the aiming's pretty precise. And it's like, this is a weird star to be going for right now, where I jump in this cannon, fire, hit the wall, fall down, walk back up to the cannon, fire, hit the wall, fall down. Like, because there's also, that cannon's doing double duty because it's also the way you get the secret star hidden in the other wall.
Spoken like somebody who doesn't know how to pull off cannonless.
Yeah, I've seen it, but no, I don't know how to. But it was weird to have these 2 stars and then kind of getting to the floating islands the same way of you're aiming with the cannon and that's almost the entire challenge of the stars.
And I think it's interesting because Womp's Fortress is probably the #1 spot where that happens. Like, there's at most 1 star that you get through the cannons in other stages, but that one,
it's got 2.
You know.
But that's there's part of me that loves that because I love snacky things. And something I really appreciate replaying this game is how many stars you get very quickly.
Oh, yes.
Like, that's fun. And those cannon stars are like, oh, a minute and I have another collectible, and the dopamine sensors are going off in my brain. But also, you know, cannons have never been a thing in Mario before. Like, if this were Donkey Kong, I'd get it. Donkey Kong had barrel cannons everywhere. But, like, this is just a weird addition. Maybe because it's 3D space. Maybe it's to kind of experiment with or show off the technique of aiming in 3D. I don't know. I don't know why they did it. I don't know why they made it such a thing.
That's interesting. I don't know that I have an answer.
Yeah.
Because it is very, like, you're right that it is very central to the game, but, like, at the same time, it, you know, is such a fairly simple mechanic.
Yeah. So that's one thing I know is weird, because I really am just looking for weird things. If I were remaking this game, I might do less cannons. It would be a shame, because there'd be less pink bomb-oms. I almost feel like they're there for the pink bomb-oms. I almost feel like they had this idea where Baba Battlefield was going to tie to every other stage.
Interesting.
Maybe they had an idea where other stages would do the same thing. And so they put pink bomb-oms in every stage, and then they had to put cannons in every stage. And then they realized that's just not sustainable for 16 stages if there are only 6 stars a stage. But it kind of reminds me, the pink bomb-oms kind of remind me, they do it better in Odyssey, of like the people touring the different kingdoms. And I love that in Odyssey, just like I love the pink bomb-oms here.
Oh, yeah. I could see that.
Yeah.
Just that, like, that sort of single level of, like, cohesion between the levels
Yeah.
and continuity.
And Bomb Battlefield's the only one that
Interesting.
gets it here, but in Mario Odyssey, they obviously expand that. All right. The other thing I wanted to talk about, just as a weird thing, but also it's weird specifically because it's a change from other Mario games, is they just handle health so differently.
Yes.
And I maybe that's going into 3D space, you just needed more health. Like, I think it was going to be hard for players. I certainly get hit a lot more in the 3D space, and there aren't really checkpoints in the way there were in earlier games.
So one aspect of this that I'm curious for your thoughts on is the fact that while you do have much more health in Mario 64 than you do in the other games, enemies also deal variable damage.
Yeah.
It's not one hit of health for every, source of damage. It's like, okay, if you run into a Goomba, that's like one little pip of health. But if you fall into lava, that's 3. If you,
Chain Chomp.
Yeah, Chain Chomp does 3. There's all sorts of different, amounts of damage that each source of damage does.
Yeah.
And I find that to be particularly interesting and honestly something that I kind of miss.
Yeah.
Because I think it does do a good job in terms of establishing that this enemy or this source of damage is much more damaging than, this other type of damage. And obviously, it's not a hugely important factor within the game design, but it's interesting, and I think that it's something that you don't see in, more recent entries in the series.
I like it in Mario 64. And side note, Chain Chomp, great adaptation from the 2D space. But
yes, fully agreed. Scared the hell out of me as a child, but
I like it in Mario 64. But I also think on the whole, I don't like Mario 64's health system. And I'm happy that it's different in Odyssey and in Bowser's Fury. And I would say the reason why is, so when I'm making a game called Flameland.
What?
I know, crazy. And in a previous iteration of Flameland, I had it so that you could get up to 10 health. And getting health was very easy and it was everywhere. And then players didn't like basically how often they were getting hit by things. I'd made Flameland very easy to lose health in. And that feeling of losing health is ultimately a pretty negative one. And so when I started revising Flameland, I was like, rather than make this basically what I had done in that iteration is I made a hardcore game and then tried to make it easier by making health plentiful. And that's just not the right approach at all. That was a terrible idea. I'm love game design, but I'm not always good at it. It takes me a few tries. In the more recent edition, what I realized was I need to cap myself at the players only get 4 health, and that's going to force me to make levels that frankly are a bit easier, but feel more fair. And ultimately you kind of don't want the player getting hit by enemies too often. You want it to happen often enough that they're scared and serious and taking it seriously, but you don't want it to happen so often that, say, you need to give them coins everywhere to replenish their health. Right? And maybe that's...
Ideally, yeah.
Maybe that's not totally fair. I think part of why you get so low on health on Mario 64 is because it does feel like a little bit when it rains, it pours. I seem to lose health in chunks in very short succession.
Yes.
So, I fall...
You take a dip in the wrong spot of lava.
Yeah.
And, it's not a good time.
So ultimately, I think Mario 64 does pretty well. Because it's not like your health is getting chipped away at. The reason you need 8 health is almost that going for the Chain Chomp star, you're going to get hit by Chain Chomp twice. And so you need 8 health because you're going to mess up. But in small concentrated sections. And then you'll have long sections where it does flow very nicely and you're not messing up. So I think maybe that this is not really a complaint I'm trying to lodge, that it takes too much of your health. But I do like... However, Mario Odyssey has managed to balance it so that you only need 3 health and you don't need coins to repair it. Now, they really can do hearts. I think it works very well. That health system feels more intuitive, and I never feel like I'm losing health. And then, of course, the way Bowser's Fury does it, it feels like a pretty direct adaptation of the 2D games, which is pretty nice.
Yeah. I would agree. I think the one thing that I miss from Super Mario 64 is the fact that really light hits, if I'm just not paying attention and I run into a Goomba, without thinking, it's almost a like completely negligible non-issue.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because I lose 1 pip of health out of, 8.
Yep.
Versus if that's a third of my health bar, that suddenly feels, whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
But, I do think that overall, like, I agree in that this is a, like, much more meaningful, much more useful health meter that has, like, a little bit more focus. And it's interesting to see, like, the trade-off there.
Yeah. So we've talked about how Mario 64 is different because it's explorable. One way in which it's the same is my complaint earlier about how many levels are about traversing. The first star in a lot of levels is pretty linear. And sometimes the second star is just the first star over again. So also pretty linear.
So nice they did it twice.
So I think, though, my last question would be kind of what I asked Seven at the end of the Pokemon Gold video. I don't think you saw that video, have you?
Oh, I did.
You did? Oh, great.
Please, you think we've been friends for how long, and you think I wouldn't listen to your podcast?
Well, that's almost wise. You know all my thoughts on Pokemon Gold. I almost wanted to ask. I almost felt like I was betraying you, not asking you, because I think you were like the first person. I was like, man, I want to do a Pokemon Gold video, and like instead I ended up talking to Seven. Well, because it's monster catching, and that's his whole thing. Anyway.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, you made the right call there. I'd just go off. If you had asked me to be on that video, the whole video would have been, okay, but the theme from the national park, though, have you heard it? It's incredible. Why don't all the games have that song?
Yeah. Wrapping up this video, I'm going to ask you is, what would you change if they put you in charge? I mean, Super Mario 3D All-Stars, huge disappointment because it wasn't a remaster and I wanted a remaster. It was a disappointment to me personally. I am someone who played Alpha Sapphire and said, yes, every remake should be this. And Alpha Sapphire's third gym town specifically, as like, they found the place in the original that was boring, pretty much the only place that was boring, and made it into something interesting. And I'm like, Alpha Sapphire, brilliant. Love it. It kept everything in the original I loved. It destroyed things in the original that were boring, and then it added... But Mario 64, they re-released it in Super Mario All-Stars, and they didn't take the opportunity to remaster it anyway. If you got the opportunity to release like a... Well, in Mario 64, DS did remaster it in some really interesting ways. We just haven't played it, so we can't talk about it. I played it as a kid. It's been too long. But if you were given the opportunity to remaster Mario 64, what would you change?
So this is an interesting question because I am firmly in the opinion that if you are going to remaster or remake a game, you should change it. You should like actually do something new with it.
Yes.
Which I know that is not the opinion that everybody has, but
no, but you're among friends here. Anyone who's listened this far,
exactly.
Anyone who's listened this far to our terrible takes is
oh yeah. The YouTube comments are going to be yelling at me for a number of other things before they yell at me for this. I think maybe your comments earlier about like kicking you out of the level, that would be an interesting change to make. Maybe like we see like the changes that are made through the levels as we like interact with them as we get the stars. That'd be an interesting kind of twist on things. It's a fairly simple one, but again, we're not talking about the most plot in-depth game that has ever existed. I would like to see them intentionally change things. Obviously, maybe not like the controls necessarily, but something that differentiates a remaster from the original in a serious way. And I'm actually, as I'm rambling here, you're bringing up Super Mario 64 DS is particularly interesting because I think that's actually kind of I have mixed feelings here because I think that game by necessity changed some of the controls in a way that I'm not a huge fan of, but I think it did change up the like actual structure of the game in an interesting way by like having Yoshi, Luigi, and Wario join Mario on the adventure and kind of add in new levels to kind of bring them into the mix, which is a very like interesting thing that I think ties into what I would want from a remake.
Yeah. my memory of that, I remember really liking getting the different characters, and especially Wario is kind of novel to play as in a Mario game. But it's something I was actually thinking about when replaying this. The King Bob fight is kind of boring in the original Mario 64. You just throw him from behind 3 times. And in Mario 64 DS, they remake it because you're Yoshi, and he throws bob-ombs at you that you like spit back at him, I think. And that's much more interesting. However, I wonder if part of the reason they made the Bob-omb fight the way it is was almost a Bowser tutorial. Because you are fighting Bowser the way you fought the original King Bob-omb. And King Bob-omb is the one non-skippable star in the game. If you are not doing ridiculous backwards BLJs, backwards long jumps, then it's the one unskippable star in the game. And it's tutorializing you how to get the 3 unskippable keys. I guess the last one's not a key, it's a giant. That's the other unskippable star, is the star that doesn't count toward your total that gives you wing cap at the end.
Yes.
But I think we talked earlier about the ROM hack that doesn't kick you out of levels. If I were to see them remaster this, that's what I'd want to see them rethink. Because I just don't think Mario 64 is the type of game that needs to kick you out of levels. So either by changing the levels significantly between stars, so they're actually new and different. There could be new enemies, there could be like... So my favorite in this genre is Bowser's Fury. And I love it because they keep the geometry of the islands the same while changing the enemies completely. And so the islands feel at once novel and familiar. And I think that's the way to do it. Like, after you beat King Bob-omb, I don't know, maybe there are fewer Bob-ombs, more Goomba? I don't know what happens, but changing the enemies of the level in a way that actually makes interacting with it different, or the obstacles in a level, would be something. Not kicking you out is another thing, though I do admit it leads to exploring the castle less, so I find myself torn as to which is the better decision. Oh, yeah. The other part, Bowser's Fury, part of what makes exploring those spaces so fun is that its version of the 8 red coin star is basically the 5 cat shard star. You get like those 5 mini cat shards and they make a cat shine. That saves which cat shards you have found between times you enter the level. And
interesting.
This is almost one of the reasons I honestly kind of wonder if it's the 8 red coin star that makes me regret that Mario 64 kicks you out of levels. Because I'm picking up 8 red coins as I go. And then especially in Big Boo's Haunt, I got the first star and I was already most of my way through the 8 red coin star. And kind of disappointed that I was going to have to leave the level and go back and search for the red coins again. And so then I did go for all the red coins, and then I died, and then I had to do both of them again. But
yeah, I think it's definitely a combination of the 8 red coins and 100 coin stars that are the biggest issue there, which in speedrunning terms, usually those are like combined into one kind of foray into the level.
Yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, it's interesting because I also kind of like think of that in the same way that I think of the notes in Banjo-Kazooie and how leaving the level, resets how many you've collected.
Well, that's why I think because Banjo-Kazooie doesn't kick you out between jiggies, and because of that notes thing, to me Banjo-Kazooie is a very different game in that it really is incentivizing you to stay in the level. So, in my video on collectathons, where I argue that Bowser's Fury is the best collectathon, I divide the genre into 2 categories, and I say they are either explorables, which are games that don't kick you out of levels, and because they don't kick you out of levels, the message to the player seems to be, to me, explore these levels fully on your first go. Or they are, what did I call them? They are explorables or they are samplers. And samplers to me are these games that boot you out of the level after every star because they don't want you to explore the level fully. They want you to try a bunch of things and come back. And Bowser's Fury is a sampler, but even samplers borrow from explorables and having these collectibles that are hidden throughout the area. So classic example is the 8 red coins. Another example are like the secrets. So in the Wet Dry World and on the Tiny Huge Island. I forgot to say Tiny Huge Island is a great reference to similar level in Super Mario Bros. 3. I love that they did it again. That's another great place of 3D adapting the 2D. Anyway, you look for these secrets, right? And that's another of just they want you to explore the whole island. And that feels much more like an explorable. But the fact that it boots you out of levels is at odds with that. And so Bowser's Fury does a great job because the cat shards, which are the element that feels more like an explorable, it saves when you leave the island which ones you've found of those 5. And so it kind of almost blends these two subgenres of collectathon. To be clear, subgenres to me, clearly to no one else, because no one else has made this terminology yet, so far as I'm aware. Revolutionary. But Mario 64, I think because it has the 8 red coins, either it would need to save your 8 red coins when you leave, which I just don't think is the right call, or would have to save your coin count when you leave, which again is not the right call, especially because coin count is tied to health. Like, in order to not... Like, I don't think Mario Galaxy has 100 coin stars, because Mario Galaxy...
No, it does not.
Mario Galaxy commits to being a sampler. In a way... Mario Sunshine half commits. It has the blue coins, which I think is a great half commitment. If only Mario Sunshine also let you choose what shines you were getting. But Mario Sunshine instead has exclusively shines that are required to beat the game and shines that are not. And you can't exchange between which is infuriating. But the blue coins are very much an explorable element in what is otherwise a sampler in Mario Sunshine, and it saves your blue coin counts when you leave. I think Mario 64, if you were going to keep the 100 coin stars, would have to be an explorable, which means it couldn't boot you out between levels. So if I were to remake it, I would either not have it boot you out between stars, or I would get rid of the 100 coin star and modify the 8 red coin star. And I think those are one of those two decisions would make the game a lot more enjoyable for my tastes, I think.
I think, yeah, that makes sense, because I do think being able to stay in the levels is definitely like a plus for the like just ability to kind of keep that like flow state almost in terms of like what you're trying, like remembering what you're trying to do and accomplishing those goals. And obviously like the exploration of the castle is like kind of the trade-off there.
And I love the castle as a hub world that you explore. I mean, talk about sense of placeness.
Yeah.
You get a lot, because you're kicked out, you get a lot more time in the castle halls where you're like, oh, what are these pillars doing? Oh, I should pound the pillars? Hard line. And now the moat's drained. Like, you get a lot more moments like that. Oh, what? Here's Mips. I was just going back to try. Yeah. But yeah, it would help you keep the flow state. I don't know. Yeah, I think I wouldn't kick you out between levels the way it's designed right now.
And I'm sort of trying to think of like a happy medium here, and I'm not having much success. Maybe this will be left as an exercise to the listener at home.
Yeah.
Of like how to optimize between like the flow state of staying within the levels and being able to just do whatever you want, while also having the like no, go try something else in another level.
This is why Bowser's Fury is the best. Because also it doesn't even kick you out of levels. It asks you to leave them on your own. And then, like, once you've left them, like, I love that when you leave this is all in the video, but when you leave the first level of Bowser's Fury, I guess second, because there's a tutorial, and then after you get your second shine, which to me is after the first level, because the tutorial also gives you a shine. After you get your second shine, they obscure the entrance to the first level by having like cheeps in front of it, so you really do just want to run forward to one of the other 2 levels. Anyway, yeah, leave it to an exercise to the viewer, because you're playing the YouTube algorithm, Layman. I never say like, comment, subscribe, but you're just going straight for comment. Hey, in the comments, leave us.
That's right, everybody. Dislike, unsubscribe, and leave a comment about how I'm wrong.
Actually, leave a comment about how Layman is wrong.
Of those things.
And if you like the video, like it. Anyway, Layman, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was great talking to you.
Glad to do it.
Let's end the recording here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So that's where the initial podcast ended, but here is the promised addenda where I address some of the mistakes. So something I want to follow up with you, though, is you also said that the movement in Mario 64 is not your favorite. And I was wondering if you could expand on that. What movement in 3D platformers is your favorite?
So this is actually a really good question. If I had to pick one to go with as my favorite, I might currently go with A Hat in Time, but I think that the what I consider my favorite kind of changes very frequently, and I think sometimes it just kind of comes down to what I'm in the mood for. And I should be clear that Mario 64 does have incredible movement.
What I loved about A Hat in Time's movement was that kind of triple jump. The, like, you hop, then it's like a little small jump, and then it's a dash. And I love how each moment of that felt different. Like, that really got me thinking about double jumps differently. But one, I don't know, is that what you like about A Hat in Time's movement, or is there something else you really like about A Hat in Time's movement?
I think that in terms of like platformer movement, that's kind of like one of just like the way that it flows very well. You get like a lot of options like from moment to moment. And I think that like a lot of people probably would feel the same way about Mario Odyssey's movement.
I was going to bring up Mario Odyssey because to me, like very similarly, it almost is like 10 times triple jump of you jump, then it's not a hop, but your little hat throw stuns you in air for a second to let you kind of move a bit more. And then you dive, which is a lot like the hand time dash. And then you can even chain that into another jump and do it again, which I don't know, to me feels like the hand time movement, but plus a little something. I really like Mario Odyssey.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's also interesting to look at games other than platformers, because I think one of my favorite movement systems in any video game, not just in platformers, actually goes to Star Fox Adventures. One of the really interesting things is that like the way that Fox controls in that game is very like, it's a good balance of smooth, but not like so smooth that you don't feel like grounded, if that makes sense. Because I think that there is that balance that you have to play where it's like, okay, if your character just responds to everything that you do one-to-one, you don't feel like grounded. It doesn't feel like there's like, any real physics to how your movement works. But, the opposite of that is if you're too strict with like, realistic movement, you kind of wind up feeling like sluggish and like kind of clunky to move. I don't know. It's a very interesting balance, and I'm struggling to come up with games that strike a better balance than Star Fox Adventures.
One thing about Mario 64 I also want to bring up is that turning around doesn't kind of happen as quickly. Like Mario does kind of like, he doesn't just instant turn around.
Yes.
And I don't like that. And I think, it's new to 3D space. Maybe they want to show his model turning around more. The other thing though, I'll admit, is like Mario in 2D space has always felt a little clunky to control because he's more slippery and slidey than most characters. Mm-hmm. And so maybe this was just something they were experimenting with, giving it a signature, but I'm glad they seem to drop that in later games. He does seem to instantly turn around later. The other thing that I'm really disappointed in you for not bringing up is Penny's Big Breakaway.
Ah, yes. Penny's Big Breakaway. Momentum in that game is truly, truly wonderful, and I know that a certain somebody has done a video on that specifically. I wish I could remember the name of the channel, but I'm sure if people click around, they'll probably be able to find it.
We could even leave a link to that genius's video in the description, I'm sure. But
whoever that was.
Whoever it was. But obviously that was my favorite movement. And it was my favorite movement because it's not just a triple jump. It is a quadruple jump. And each part of the quadruple jump is its unique own thing. It's like in Penny's Big Breakaway, you can jump and then you can swing, or you can dash, or you can jump again. And you can do them in any order. I love that. And I just really had a time with Penny's Big Breakaway. The momentum felt very good in that game. And it is a very different kind of 3D platformer because it's not really a collectathon. It is much more a point A to point B. So I don't know how it would work in a collectathon, but I'd like to see someone try. Something I got wrong in our last discussion about Mario 64 is I was telling you 2, I think it's really interesting how these levels have very unique enemies. I was talking about, like, I think Monty Moles only appear on Tall Tall Mountain, and Bob-ombs, I don't really know if they appear outside Bomb-omb Battlefield, and Thwomps, there are 2 Thwomps in Whomp's Fortress, and you tried to call me out on Whomp vs. Thwomp, but you didn't succeed.
I got thrown off by Thwimps, excuse me.
The thing I got most wrong is Bob-ombs are actually everywhere in this game.
Yes.
In a way I did not quite remember, which makes sense given what we were saying about the grabbing, right? Like, they're nice and easy to grab onto, and they make use of that grab mechanic in a way that other enemies don't. But if you want to make that grab mechanic really into something, you need the Bob-ombs in a lot of places. Thwomps, I actually at the time said there was 1 Thwomp in Whomp's Fortress when there are 2, and there's a Thwomp in the Clock Tower.
Oh, yes. I always forget about him.
The Monty Moles, I said, only appear on Tall Tall Mountain, but when I was playing, I saw them again in Hazy Maze Cave, and I don't know if they appear elsewhere. Oh, and then I said those pedal guys. What are the pedal guys with the little...
Spindrift.
Spindrifts. You always know that word and I never do. Spindrifts, which we were like, our original Mario 64. Super weird. Weird enemy to introduce.
Yep.
And especially weird because I think I told you they only appear in 1 place, but I think they appear in 2. I think it's both of the ice levels get Spindrifts. And they just don't... They look like a Hawaiian enemy, right? Like they've got like...
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Or like a beach or at least a forest. Why are they on the 2 ice levels anyway? The thing I was trying to say is all these guys appear in 1 place, and clearly they appear in at least 2. But I still think the point stands that I was trying to make, which is one way these levels make themselves distinct is their enemies and the not overuse of enemies. So I was playing this weekend a 3D platformer / collectathon called Paper Clay, and it's this indie game that got released recently. It's beautiful, but something I was noticing is there actually isn't all that much enemy variety. Like, very early on, there are these like kind of staple removers that you fight, and then there are scissors, and those are pretty much everywhere in the game. They introduce a few other enemies after that, but just not really enough to make the levels feel distinct. And because of that repetition of enemies, it's very hard to tell you any levels I played in Paper Clay.
Right.
It's also hard, I think, because so many of the levels are themed around the spaces they're in. Whereas in Mario 64, you know, there are 15 levels, and each of those levels looks extremely distinct. And then I think that is helped by the distinct enemies. I think that kind of use of enemies to make levels distinct is something that the 2D Mario games do very well, where like I remember playing Mario Bros 3 and I remember the one where the spinny shells, what are the black shells? The beetles fall from the buzzy beetles. Buzzy beetles fall from the ceiling and like fly at you, and I think you're in the interior of a pyramid. I think it's World 2, but it's a memorable level because those enemies don't really appear in many other places. If those enemies were everywhere all the time, and especially on ceilings everywhere all the time, that would not be nearly as memorable a level. And I really like this way that Mario games, part of the way they distinguish the levels between themselves is using enemies in unique ways.
It's interesting that you bring this up because I think, yeah, there are really like 2 ways to do it. Either you just go wild with the level design, and in this case, I'm like taken back to another game that I briefly speedran, not to brag or anything, but Psychonauts, and by extension Psychonauts 2, which I believe, I don't know if you've ever played, but...
I have not. It somehow missed me.
You might enjoy Psychonauts, but it goes like wild with the level design, which, you know, the sort of nature of like the story and the world really let it kind of do that. And not obviously it also goes like very wild with the enemy design as part of that as well. But like, yeah, I very much agree that like having very distinct and like differentiated levels really help like a platformers especially like kind of stay in your memory, just because I feel like it can be very easy, you know, and part of this is like a budgetary / time kind of thing where it's like, you know, you gotta, if you have your assets, you've gotta make the best use of them as you possibly can.
Oh yeah, I should not get on Paper Clay's case because Paper Clay was like a one-man team and is really impressive for a one-man team.
Yeah. I can't believe these lazy independent solo developers aren't, you know, devoting dozens of years to creating art assets.
Layman said it, not me.
True.
But I wanted to challenge you, Layman. Mario 64 has 15 main courses, and I was curious, how memorable are they? So, can you name them?
Okay. All right, let's go. Bob-omb Battlefield, Jolly Rogers Bay, Womp's Fortress. Are we counting like Peach's Secret Slide? Does that
I
count as
don't believe so. No,
distinct
main
course?
courses,
Okay.
6-star
'Cause
courses.
that is, I do remember that is one of the Castle's secret stars. We have Bowser in the Dark World.
Ooh,
we have.
I don't know if the Bowser courses count toward the 16.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll not count that then.
Wait, so
So
you start over. Bob-omb Battlefield.
okay, starting over. Bob-omb Battlefield, Womp's Fortress, Jolly Roger Bay, Snowman's Land, Big Boo's Haunt. Then we have Lethal Lava Land, Shifting Sand Land, Hazy Maze Cave. Then if we go upstairs, we've got Wet Dry World, Tiny Huge Island, Tall Mountain, Cool Mountain? Is that
Something like that. I don't know the name,
Okay.
but we know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I might have gotten. Oh, I think I had Cool Mountain and Snowman's Land flipped, but
Yeah, that's it. Snowman's Land is yeah.
it's upstairs. Yeah. Then we have. Let's see. I think that's everything in that section of the castle. Then we have Tick-Tock Clock, Rainbow Ride. How many am I missing?
One. Oh, you know what it is?
What am I missing?
I've remembered what it is. The Bowser submarine level.
Oh, yes, of course. Dire Docks.
Yeah.
How could I have forgotten?
So, excellent. Well, I think that speaks well to its memorability, or at least that we've played too much of it. The other thing I did want to compliment is each of these levels does feel distinct. I might complain that there's a lot of climbing in them, but each of the levels does feel distinct geometrically. Like, I don't
Yes.
think you would mistake the geometry from them. So it's not just the enemies, it is also the world design.
And one thing that I think really helps that is that the way that the stars are laid out, they always have you exploring different parts of the level. So, I would say that there are a couple levels in there that are essentially mountains, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of what you were saying, in terms of climbing. But I think that a lot of the different stars, thinking to Snowman's Land, for example, right?
Yeah.
There's only one star that actually makes you climb the mountain. All of the rest are defeat the bully, go over to this weird corner that you have to jump off of a spindrift to get to. Oh, hey, there's this little igloo that you have to crawl into. It's taking you to different parts of the map and not just saying, all right, climb the mountain in 5 different ways.
And if we are talking about the mountain ones, I think it's important to note that Cool Mountain is kind of an inverse mountain, in that the point of Cool Mountain is actually going down, not up. And that subversion makes Cool Mountain feel very different.
Yes, I do agree.
Actually, Cool Mountain is one of the places I can appreciate the amount of sliding you do. I think all the sliding in Cool Mountain is kind of fun and part of the course and good and intentional. Whereas, again, trying to climb that pyramid and sliding off the slopes of the pyramid, I was like, I can acknowledge that I should not be able to just climb the pyramid, but it feels very frustrating to take a wrong step and suddenly be sliding to my death.
Yes.
So, the other thing I got wrong last time we talked is I said that Mario 64 has a lot of story in the levels, which isn't really true. I think one of our complaints is actually that the levels don't change a lot when they boot you out, but it's kind of true. So, one, players have added some story to, is the tower that appears in Womp's Fortress made out of the dead Womp King? After you defeat him, does he give up and become building material? Or players have made a story of, is the third bowling ball in the, pit before you climb the mountain on Bob-omb Battlefield? It appears after you beat King Bob-omb. So is that the dead and mangled corpse of the King Bob-omb? So players have added that story, but let's call those maybe not quite canon.
It's fan
it. But the reason I said there was story in Mario 64 is because there was way more dialogue than I remembered. The Bob-omb and Bob-omb Battlefield, the Boo and Big Boo's Haunt, and the Womp at the top of Womp's Fortress have quite a lot to say to you. And especially the Bob-omb King, right?
Yes.
This is a place where actually there is a bit of story, because the Bob-ombs are asking you for your help, and it explains why the pink Bob-ombs are helping you out through the rest of the game. So there is some story there, and it's level-specific story, and that is interesting, and it feels somewhat unique to Mario 64 because it disappears in the later titles. Something else that I think would be interesting to add to Mario 64, though, are cameos from other levels, like we were saying in Odyssey, and kind of like the pink Bob-ombs, because it's really neat that the pink Bob-ombs tie into every other level. It would be interesting if every level had a first star that somehow tied to later or earlier levels. And that would be hard to do because there are so many levels. But, like, I've already proposed getting rid of the duplicate run to the top of certain levels. Like, in Bomb Bomb's Battlefield, you run to the top twice, right? What if, instead of Race to Koopa and the Quick, what if you had something that was unlocked by, say, beating the Womp King? That, like, then you'd go back to Bomb Bomb Battlefield and there was a cameo there. Or even later in the game, something that would unlock that star for you. I think that could be really interesting. It is also, you know, interesting to know Mario 64 DS added stars to a lot of these levels. I think there is room to add stars. And I think giving the levels more story or more integration with other levels. Having, you know, a rebel force who wants to beat the Womp King too, who will help you out if you beat the Womp King. I would be curious, if I were remaking this game, I'd like to see more of those cameos, because I think the pink Bomb-Bombs on every stage, tying every stage back to Bomb Bomb Battlefield, is something really special. And similarly, the cameos in Odyssey that make it feel like one full connected world are really special. And I'd like to see more of that.